I had just stepped out of my dusty pickup, dragging my duffel bag across the gravel, when she slammed her hand on the ranch gate, already speaking into her phone. "He is trespassing. Officer, arrest him now. I don't care if he claims he owns this ranch. This property is under HOA authority," she shouted, pacing, her voice cutting to the quiet hills. I gripped my grandfather's old deed tighter, heart hammering, feeling the weight of 70 years of family history. Sirens wailed faintly down the valley, but she didn't flinch, pointing at me as she barked orders into phone. I squared my shoulders, took a slow step forward, and reminded myself I had every right to this land. Today, nothing was going to intimidate me. Before we dive into this HOA showdown, comment below from state you are watching us. I hadn't even finished unstrapping my duffel bag from the dusty pickup when I saw her, pacing in front of the ranch gate, phone pressed to her ear. "You can't just drive in here. This is private property. I don't care what papers he has. Someone stop him." Her voice cracked and rose over the gravel crunching under her heels, sharp and insistent. I gripped my grandfather's old deed, feeling the worn leather press into my palms. Every instinct from my army days, observe, anticipate, remain calm, kicked in immediately. The morning sun glinted off the wooden fence posts, and the cattle nearby raised their heads, ears swiveling at the sudden noise. Dust from the gravel swirled around my boots. The smell of dirt and dry grass thick in the air. She waved the phone frantically, shouting into it. "No, you don't understand. He's claiming this land, but it belongs to the community. Officers, please hurry." I could hear her urgency, her tone a mix of anger and panic. But even as she ranted, I noticed her movements, pointing toward the driveway, pacing in short bursts, her gestures sharp. She wanted control, and she thought shouting would give it. I set my bag down and stepped closer, deliberately slow. "I'm Ethan Cadwell," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my family's ranch. I've got the deed right here." I held it up so she could see, the edges fraying, the signature of my grandfather clear. She paused mid-gesture, narrowed her eyes at the paper, and muttered sharply into phone, "No, you don't get it. He's walking right onto HOA land." Her words bounced off the fence posts and into the pasture. She spun around, gesturing toward me, and barked, "Officers, stop him before he damages something." I noticed the small details, the way her heels dug into the gravel, the twitch of her finger pointing at the gate, the tension in her shoulders. Even as she shouted, I felt the calmness that comes from knowing you're on solid ground, literally and legally. The creek behind the pasture reflected sunlight, and the cattle shifted their weight, unsettled but curious. The old barn in the distance stood stoic, silent, like it had witnessed 100 confrontations before this. I took another slow step forward, letting the deed remain visible. "I'm not here to fight. I'm home. This land has been in my family for 3 generations," I said, my voice carrying over the gravel. The sirens in the valley grew louder, faint but insistent, echoing the tension between us. She jabbed a finger at the fence line and shouted something into the phone I couldn't fully catch, her eyes narrowing. Then she leaned closer to the gate, speaking faster, her words a flurry of accusations and urgent commands. Even without hearing every detail, I understood she was trying to assert control, to make me hesitate. But I didn't. I stepped closer to the gate, boots crunching gravel, the smell of dry grass sharp in the morning air. The cattle scattered slightly at the sudden movement, birds taking flight. I could feel the weight of the land beneath me, the fences, the pasture, the creek, the barn, and I knew one thing clearly. No amount of shouting or pointing was going to push me off my family's property. After the tension at the gate finally eased, though not entirely, I stepped inside the familiar boundaries of Stone Creek Ranch. The morning sun illuminated the rolling pastures, highlighting the cattle lazily grazing, the creek glinting in the distance, and the barn's weathered red siding catching golden light. I breathed in deeply, smelling the dry grass, dirt, and faint scent of hay. It was grounding, a reminder of why I'd returned. My grandfather had worked these fields since 1952, and this land wasn't just dirt and fences. It was our family's history. I wandered past the old barn, the boards creaking under my touch, and noticed the way the wind teased the tall grass along the fences. A few cows lifted their heads, curious but calm. They knew this place. My eyes scanned the pasture, remembering the county fair events my grandfather had organized here, the summers of helping neighbors, teaching kids how to ride horses and respect the land. I felt the weight of responsibility and pride pressing against my chest. Karen, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, hadn't gone far. From the gravel driveway, I could hear her muttering rapidly into the phone. "No, you're not listening. He's walking across what's technically HOA land. Officers, you need to respond now." Her gestures were frantic, pointing toward the creek, waving the phone, pacing back and forth. She clearly thought escalation would intimidate me, but my grandfather's lessons in Army discipline reminded me patience often won battles faster than shouting. I walked toward the old fence line, running my hands along the weathered posts. "Stone Creek Ranch, 1952. I whispered, recalling the carved date on the gate. 3 generations had maintained this land, long before any subdivision was planned. Across the way, the contrast between our time-weathered ranch and the newly built luxury homes in the neighboring HOA was stark. White stucco walls, manicured lawns, and pristine driveways. Nothing natural about them, nothing lived in. And yet, here I stood on a land that predated all of it. Later, I checked the barn, seeing our old tractors and tools lying neatly in their usual spots. Mrs. Rodriguez was already working on fixing one of them, humming softly. "Welcome home," she said, giving me a small smile as she wiped her hands on her apron. "Looks like Karen's up to her usual." I nodded silently, noting the calm efficiency of those who truly care for the land. I pulled out the old ranch map from a drawer and traced the boundaries with my finger. My grandfather had documented every corner, every creek bend, and waterway on this 200-acre property. That map would become crucial, as Karen's attempts to manipulate surveys had already begun. Across the hills, I could see a neighbor receiving a delivery of hay, their truck bouncing lightly over the gravel. Life here went on, even amidst conflict. Karen's car sat parked at the edge of the driveway, engine idling. She shouted into her phone again, "No, you don't understand. He's using this land for livestock. That's against regulations. Send someone now." Her voice carried, but my calm response was inaction, observation, and planning. I let her words fade into the ambient noise. The hum of insects, the cattle chewing, the creek flowing slowly. Everything about this ranch reminded me of what was at stake. Not just property, but legacy. By midday, I had walked every acre I could safely survey, documenting the fences, water lines, and pastures. Birds circled above, cattle grazed with quiet awareness, and the ranch felt alive, defiant against intrusion. My thoughts centered on strategy. This land had rules, history, and legal protections. Karen could scream and call, but she couldn't change the truth etched into these fields. The days after my return were tense but instructive. Karen Whitfield, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, had clearly set a schedule of harassment. It started subtle. Cameras pointed at the fence line, her phone always ready to call, and friendly neighbors suddenly delivering notices about supposed violations. But as I surveyed the ranch that morning, a white pickup carrying a surveyor rolled up along the driveway, kicking up dust behind it. I stepped toward the gate, the worn leather deed in hand, and the surveyor waved toward me nervously. "Ma'am said you weren't supposed to be on this property," he stammered. I exhaled slowly. "I'm on my own land," I said firmly. The ranch stretched around us, fences old but solid, pastures dotted with cattle, a small creek winding in the distance. Every square foot had been maintained for generations. Karen's voice carried across the grass, sharp and insistent, though she remained on the phone. "This is the HOA's jurisdiction. I don't care what he says. He doesn't decide." She waved her arms toward the surveyor, gesturing at Ethan mid-step along the gravel driveway. The tension was palpable, but her gestures were almost theatrical, a mix of frustration and assumed authority. The surveyor stepped onto the property carefully, tape measure and flag stakes in hand, marking corners near the driveway. I let him work, observing quietly. The cows, curious, edged closer, sniffing the flags. Dust swirled lightly, the barn glinting behind us, and the morning light made the pastures almost golden. Later, Karen arrived in her white Mercedes, engine humming, stopping short of the gravel driveway. She jumped out, phone pressed her ear again. "No, you don't understand. He's running livestock here illegally. Get someone out to stop this now." She gestured sharply toward Ethan, mid-45, standing calmly with his hands on his hips, surveying the land. Her voice rose, urgent but human, frustration, fear, and authority all mixed in. She brought a lawyer with her that afternoon, clipboard clutched, scanning the surveyor's work. "This is unacceptable," she barked, still composed, pacing along the edge of the fence line. "Remove the cattle or I'll escalate this." Her gestures pointed at the livestock, toward the surveyor, toward me. Every movement carried tension. I stepped forward, showing the lawyer the old maps, the deeds, and the cattle's grazing permissions. "This ranch has been operating under agricultural exemption since 1952. I said calmly, letting my voice rise only slightly to be heard over the breeze and distant birds. "Everything here is documented. Your complaints are unfounded." Karen's hand jabbed at the gravel. Her phone still clutched her ear. "You're not listening. Officers, he's refusing our instructions." Her words were natural, urgent, as if each call reinforced her authority. She didn't scream for effect. She reacted like someone cornered, trying to assert power through proximity and volume. The surveyor finished his measurements, eyes flicking between me and the HOA party, clearly unsure who was in charge. I didn't need to raise my voice. I let the evidence, the maps, and the legacy of the ranch speak. The cattle shifted uneasily, kicking up dirt, while the barn stood quietly in the mid-ground, a silent testament to decades of careful maintenance. By late afternoon, Karen's frustration was evident in her rapid gesturing and constant phone calls. She waved toward the flags, toward the gravel, toward me, each motion a human attempt to reclaim control. Yet, every inch of the ranch she tried to claim had already been mapped, surveyed, and historically documented. The tension hung over property like the Texas heat, thick and unavoidable but resolute. Karen's harassment escalated over the next few days. The subtle intrusions, the photos at the fence, the unsolicited HOA notices, were replaced by formal complaints and legal threats. It was obvious she had researched the ranch, but she didn't realize how prepared I was. My first step was to gather every piece of evidence I could, maps, deeds, and county records. I spent hours at the county courthouse, flipping through dusty archives, comparing old zoning maps to modern surveys. "You can't be serious. He's claiming this is all his land." I could hear Karen's voice snapping over the phone to someone, the tension in her tone clear. She gestured sharply while pacing, pointing toward the entrance to the courthouse parking lot, as if it would magically assert her authority. I stayed calm, letting the evidence speak. The 1952 agricultural exemption that protected Stone Creek Ranch from surrounding development was crystal clear. Overlay zoning documents showed that Meadowbrook estates had been built around us, not over us. Every paper I touched, every map I cross-checked, made me more confident. Karen, frustrated, seemed unable to control the narrative, barking into phone with increasing urgency. "No, you're misunderstanding. He can't just claim HOA land. Get someone out here before it's too late." Back at the ranch, a professional surveyor arrived with GPS equipment and measuring tools. We walked the property, Ethan Cadwell, 45, veteran and licensed engineer, leading the inspection along the fences and gate lines, comparing the legal maps to physical boundaries. The survey confirmed what I already suspected. Several HOA structures, including the entrance pillars and part of the community road, encroached nearly 15 feet onto our ranch. Karen arrived in her white Mercedes later that afternoon. Phone pressed her ear again. "Officers, he's obstructing the survey. You need to act." She pointed toward the flags, trying to force compliance, her gestures sharp, her voice urgent but controlled. She wasn't screaming for show. She was genuinely trying to assert authority over someone who wouldn't back down. I calmly documented every detail. Photos of fences, aerial footage of pastures, GPS coordinates of survey markers. Roosevelt, our prize bull, wandered nearby, occasionally staring at Karen's car as if judging her presence. Neighbors peeked from the edges of their properties. Curiosity and concern etched into their expressions. The county inspector arrived to review the site and verify compliance with agricultural exemptions. Karen tried to intimidate him, waving her arms and repeating claims of unauthorized livestock operations and property violations, her voice rising and falling like a storm. The inspector, professional and methodical, followed the survey and inspected the ranch, ultimately confirming the property was in perfect order. Karen's bluff was exposed by her own words. She had inadvertently admitted harassment in front of a government official. Back at the courthouse, I worked with Nolan McCarthy, our family attorney, reviewing historical meeting minutes and deeds. Bradley Whitfield, her husband and the developer, had once proudly touted the ranch's rustic charm as a selling point for the subdivision. Every piece of documentation we collected painted a clear picture. The ranch was legally untouchable. By the time the sun began to set over the rolling pastures, Ethan Cadwell, 45, veteran and licensed engineer, stood near the creek, watching the cattle graze, surveying the land with quiet satisfaction. Karen, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, drove away, her phone still clutched tightly. She had no idea how much of her supposed authority had just been dismantled by patience, preparation, and facts. Karen's next tactic was both audacious and reckless. By mid-morning, heavy machinery appeared along the ranch's creek, contractors digging a diversion channel. Dust and water spray filled the air, the metallic clatter echoing across the pasture. She had convinced herself that redirecting the natural flow of the creek would validate her claims about mosquito hazards and unauthorized cattle runoff. I approached the crew calmly. Ethan Cadwell, 45, veteran and licensed engineer, wearing work gloves and boots, inspecting the dig site. "Hold off on any permanent work," I said. "This creek is on my land and protected by riparian rights. Any diversion without permits is illegal." Karen Whitfield, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, waved her arms toward the machinery and yelled into her phone. "No, he can't just stop this. Officers, you need to enforce the HOA's authority. This is urgent." Her gestures were frantic, but her words were human and reactive, an authentic display of panic and ambition colliding. I began documenting everything. Photos of the creek's natural course, water samples in sterile bottles, and detailed notes on the machinery. Roosevelt, the bull, watched cautiously from the fence line, occasionally snorting and pawing at the dirt as if sensing the tension. Birds scattered along the tree line, the sunlight catching the dust and water spray like a cinematic filter across a ranch. By midday, I contacted the Texas Water Development Board, providing them with detailed maps, water tests, and photographs showing the creek's natural state. Karen's attempt at control was unraveling. I also mapped the watershed, demonstrating that any diversion would flood 3 houses in Meadowbrook Estates. Meanwhile, she posted edited Ring doorbell footage to social media, showing cattle supposedly fouling the HOA water supply. The post went viral locally, drawing attention from neighbors and small news outlets. I countered by sharing my documented water tests, highlighting how the ranch maintained clean, sustainable water management. Later, a state water inspector arrived at the ranch. Ethan Cadwell guided him along the creek, showing the natural flow, culverts, and runoff paths. The inspector nodded, taking samples and notes. Karen hovered nearby, gesturing toward the machinery, trying to assert her authority again. "You see? He's contaminating the creek. This is a public hazard." The inspector remained professional, reviewing the data and surveying the land. Within hours, a cease and desist order was issued for the HOA's contractors, with daily fines threatened if any unauthorized diversion continued. Karen's frustration was palpable, her hand waving helplessly at the creek while she barked into the phone. "This isn't fair. You can't just let him override HOA decisions." By late afternoon, the ranch was calm again. Roosevelt waded slowly in the creek, splashing water, while the cattle grazed peacefully along the pasture. Contractors filled in the diversion channel, moving slowly and under supervision. I reviewed the water test results one last time, satisfied that the ranch's sustainable practices were validated. The environmental inspector even recommended our operations as a model for responsible ranch management. Nearby, a local newspaper photographer captured images of Roosevelt in the creek, the bar in the background, and the sprawling pastures, highlighting the ranch's heritage and responsible stewardship. Karen, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, drove away in her Mercedes. Phone still clutched, realizing her social media tax and diversion plans had backfired. The day ended with the sun dipping behind the hills, casting long shadows over the rolling pastures. Stone Creek Ranch stood resilient, its legacy intact. While Karen's influence weakened, her attempt to control thwarted by legal rights, careful documentation, and a calm, measured response. Karen's next move was subtle but insidious. By early morning, several citations appeared on a ranch mailbox. Unsafe structures, improper storage, unlicensed auto repair. I picked them up one by one, reading aloud to myself, Ethan Cadwell, 45, veteran and licensed engineer, as Roosevelt grazed nearby. Unlicensed auto repair? On my own property? I muttered, scanning the barn workshop. Every tool, every bench, every storage area was organized meticulously. This was not chaos. It was professional work. I drove to the City Code Enforcement Office, meeting Officer Dale Kruger. As I observed him, the connections became apparent. Financial ties to Bradley Whitfield and a history of siding with HOA complaints. He measured fences and photograph equipment, notebook in hand, unaware I had documentation proving compliance. Karen Whitfield, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, arrived at the office. Phone clutched tightly. He's violating codes. Do something now. Her gestures were precise, pointing toward Ethan's property photos and files, urgency in her posture, frustration in her voice. She wasn't performing for effect. She was genuinely attempting to enforce her perceived authority. I calmly presented my credentials. Licensed professional engineer, Army Corps of Engineers veteran. My training and expertise left no room for misinterpretation. Archival documents from my military service, structural certifications, and property blueprints clearly demonstrated that the barn roof, storage areas, and equipment were all legal and safe. Back at the ranch, I reviewed security camera footage, showing every interaction between the contractors, neighbors, and HOA representatives. Karen's allegations about livestock cruelty or unsafe structures were immediately disproven. Each time she attempted to escalate, her own words and actions, gesturing toward equipment, pointing at property, were on camera, creating a transparent record of her overreach. Meanwhile, Karen tried to tarnish my reputation. Rumors about past military disciplinary actions were circulated, misrepresenting a lawful refusal to follow an illegal order. I countered by presenting archival records and sworn statements from fellow engineers, verifying both my service and professional conduct. The neighborhood became a silent ally. Women and men from nearby homes formed coffee clutch intelligence networks, quietly observing the HOA's movements, sharing updates, and supporting the ranch. Business owners refused to cooperate with Karen's attempts at boycotts, maintaining loyalty to Stone Creek Ranch. Ethan Cadwell, 45, veteran and licensed engineer, led strategic discussions at the ranch workshop, coordinating with neighbors and attorneys to anticipate every HOA maneuver. Karen Whitfield's frustration was palpable. She paced along the driveway and fence line, phone pressed her ear. I don't care what documents he has. He's still violating rules. Her gestures were human and reactive, an authentic mix of panic and aggression. Yet every action she took was countered by evidence, neighbor vigilance, and careful documentation. By late afternoon, the barn workshop buzzed with quiet activity. Maps spread across tables, laptops reviewing legal codes, and neighbors coordinating surveillance. Roosevelt the bull remained near the fences, alert but calm, a living reminder of the ranch's history. Outside, the sun dipped behind rolling pastures, casting long shadows over fences and gravel paths. Karen, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, left the property after a series of failed attempts to intimidate or enforce citations. her body language tense and hurried, told the story more than words ever could. Frustration, urgency, and the growing realization that her authority was ineffective against preparation, expertise, and community support. The breakthrough came when I visited the state archives. Ethan Cadwell, 45, veteran and licensed engineer, carefully combing through rows of old property records. Each cabinet held decades of history, yellowed papers stacked neatly but densely. My hands trembled slightly as I located my grandfather's original 1952 deed. There, in faded ink, were the mineral rights and detailed acreage of Stone Creek Ranch. The clerical error from 1987 jumped off the page. 25 acres of the ranch, including the HOA's entrance pillars, the community center, and half the main road, had never been officially transferred to the county. They were legally still part of Stone Creek Ranch, and my family had been paying taxes on them continuously. Karen Whitfield, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, paced outside the archives building, phone presser ear. No, he can't have this. Verify this immediately. Her gestures were frantic, pointing toward the building entrance as if her authority extended inside. The tone was human, reactive, a mix of panic and disbelief. With photographs and certified copies of the deeds in hand, I moved to the county tax office, reviewing records that confirmed the discrepancy. The clerk verified the continuous tax payments from our family, a glaring contradiction to the HOA's claim. Each document, each map, was another piece of irrefutable evidence. Back at the ranch, I convened a strategic meeting in the workshop. Maps were spread across tables, GPS markers plotted, and photographs from the archives displayed. Ethan Cadwell, 45, veteran and licensed engineer, explained the implications. The HOA had been living, operating, and enforcing rules on land that was legally ours. The irony was almost cinematic. Karen attempted a drive-by confrontation, her Mercedes approaching the ranch gates. She gestured toward the workshop and called out to officers on her phone. "This isn't right. He's trespassing on HOA property." Her words, though loud, were rendered powerless by the documents in our possession. Neighbors gathered cautiously outside, observing. Their expressions shifted from concern to astonishment as I revealed the full scope of the clerical error. Discussions buzzed quietly but intensely. The HOA had been operating illegally, and every overreach Karen had attempted was now a liability for herself and the board. The final piece of the puzzle was clear. A quiet title action would force public acknowledgement of the property dispute. Temporary barriers were installed at the disputed entrance to capture the inevitable reaction from Karen and any law enforcement she called. Every step was documented meticulously, ready for legal presentation. By late afternoon, Ethan Cadwell, 45, veteran and licensed engineer, stood surveying the ranch from a hill, maps in hand, Roosevelt grazing in the pasture below. Karen Whitfield, mid-40s, short, messy blonde hair, sharp expression, bold business suit, drove away again. Phone presser ear, her posture tense and frantic. The realization of her misjudgment was evident, even without words. The day ended with a quiet sense of triumph. Every map, document, and neighbor testimony was in place. Karen's overreach had set the stage for her downfall. The ranch, the land, and its legacy were finally positioned to reclaim what had always belonged to us. The calm before the public hearing was deceptive but necessary, the culmination of decades of meticulous record-keeping, preparation, and strategy. Standing on the hill overlooking Stone Creek Ranch, I felt the weight of generations behind me. Every fence, pasture, and barn told a story of resilience, patience, and hard work. Karen's overreach had been exposed, and the HOA's missteps laid bare for community and authorities to see. Justice had not been instant, but it was thorough and earned. As the sun set over the rolling hills, I realized the importance of knowing your rights, staying calm, and documenting everything. If you've enjoyed witnessing the story unfold and the triumph of truth over false authority, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow more real-life inspired HOA drama stories.